Today, I'm going to be reading The Fantastic Ferris Wheel, the story of inventor George Ferris. Now, this is the story about how the Ferris wheel was invented. A long time ago, more than 100 years, in fact, a young boy lay in the grass thinking, that water wheel, it goes round and round and up and down. The current from a nearby stream made the wheel move. The boy watched, fascinated. Maybe there is another way to make a wheel go round, he thought. Many years later, the boy, George Ferris, became an engineer. He now designed bridges and buildings and roads made of steel and concrete. But he still had wheels on his mind. He visited Chicago, the city getting ready for a giant World's Fair known as the Columbian Exposition of 1893. It would open in the spring. Architects were designing elaborate buildings for the fair's exhibits and performances. Musicians were writing special music. Artists painted glorious pictures, and sculptors carved giant statues. Almost every country in the world planned to show off its creations at the event. They were buildings devoted to the latest inventions in manufacturing, farming, and transportation. One building featured new developments in the field of electricity, stoves and elevators, telephones, photographs. But most impressive, though, were the displays of electricity used for lighting. This was a dramatic advance in science. The entire fairgrounds would be illuminated by an array of lights, large and small. This would be one of the most exciting attractions of the fair. There were plans for beautiful parks and small lakes called lagoons, with boats for tourists. For $3, people could ride in a hot air balloon. Different countries would create villages showing off their cultures. There would be camels and elephants, even a belly dancer from Egypt. Visitors from Europe, Asia, and Africa would be there. The fair was going to be grand. The men and women in charge of the fair wanted something special for Chicago to draw people to the event. Something no one had ever seen before, something no one could imagine. They were not sure what it would be, but it needed to be spectacular. George Ferris met with other engineers in Chicago. Daniel Burnham, one of the men in charge of planning the fair, spoke to the group and challenged all the American engineers to come up with extraordinary ideas. To be more creative, he insisted. Just 3 years earlier, a French engineer named Gustave Eiffel had designed a special tower for France's 1889 World's Fair. Built of more than 8,000 tons of iron, the tower soared more than 984 feet, 300 meters above the Paris Fairgrounds. People came from all over the world to see the Eiffel Tower. Think no little thoughts, Burnham told the group. Make big plans. America's engineers were on the spot. But all their ideas seemed silly or impractical. After hearing Burnham's challenge, George Ferris began to dream, plan, and design. Maybe he even remembered the water wheel from his younger days. A few weeks later, while talking with some engineer friends, he pushed a piece of paper across the table. His friends looked at the sketch he had drawn. It was a huge circle surrounded by a web of delicate lines. Next to the drawing were notes, numbers, and more drawings. What was it? They asked, puzzled. It's an observation wheel for the World's Fair, he answered excitedly. His friends murmured. From the wheel, people can observe or see far into the distance, he explained. His friends knew about observation wheels. They were small, wooden contraptions sometimes seen at carnivals or local fairs. But the one George was showing them looked enormous. They studied his drawing more closely. Were those passenger cars attached to the wheel? People would actually ride on this towering thing. George must be out of his mind, they thought. In June 1892, George showed his design to the organizers of the fair. There's never been anything like it, he told them. The wheel would rise 264 feet, 80.5 meters, into the air, the height of a 26-story building. 36 passenger cars would hang from the rim of the wheel. Each car would hold 60 riders as they circled above the fairgrounds. The power for the wheel would come from the 1,000 horsepower steam engines. The fair organizers examined the plans carefully. The wheel would be unique, they agreed. Unlike the Eiffel Tower in Paris, it would move. It certainly would attract people's attention, but it would be way too dangerous. It was a monstrosity, one man said. What if it collapsed with 2,000 people on it? Or what if a big wind came and blew it down? I'm an engineer, George said. I will make sure the wheel is perfectly safe. The members of the fair committee said yes, George could build his wheel, but the next day changed their minds. It seemed too risky. No matter, George remained determined. He spent thousands of dollars of his own money to make his plans more detailed. He pursued wealthy investors to help fund the building of the wheel, as there was no money in the fair's budget to pay for the project. In November, Daniel Burham again turned down George's proposal, but he agreed to show it to the other members of the committee. Finally, on December 16, 1892, the fair committee said yes. Go ahead and build your crazy wheel, they told him, but make sure it's safe and hurry. The fair opens to the public in 4.5 months. Chicago is known for its cold weather, but the winter of 1892 to 1893 was one of the worst ever. Bitter winds blew from Lake Michigan. Blizzards dumped layers of snow and ice on the fairgrounds. The temperature dropped to freezing, then it dropped to below freezing, then it dropped to below zero. Workers blasted through the frozen fairgrounds using dynamite. The cold was not the only problem. Workers had to dig deep into the earth before they found solid ground. The crisscross steel bars at the bottom of the giant hole. They worked for weeks in the bitter cold, pouring layers of concrete at the top of the steel, on top of the steel. The heavy wheel would be supported by solid towers, which required a firm foundation. George needed more than 100,000 different parts to build the wheel. Some were tiny, some were enormous. Railroad cars from all over the United States chugged their ways to the Chicago fairgrounds. The cars carried screws, bolts, and steel bars. Engineers checked all the parts to make sure everyone was perfectly crafted. Groups of workers carefully pieced the parts together. Each had to fit exactly into the right place. As the weather in Chicago grew warmer, George's strange-looking creation began to rise above the fairgrounds. People craned their heads to see. It looked like two gigantic bicycle wheels hanging 40 feet apart. Steel braces and wires connected the two wheels. A heavy iron pole called an axle ran through the centers of the wheels, joining them. Look at that, people as they gazed up. It looks like a spider web, one person said. Folks were not sure of what to think of George's invention. On May 1st, 1893, the fair opened to the public. Thousands of excited men, women, and children poured through the entrance gates. Some came from downtown Chicago, traveling by boat across part of Lake Michigan. Some arrived by train, others walked or rode bicycles. Visitors around the world marveled at the attractions. They were dazzled by the fair and hundreds of new sights. While George's big wheel was not yet finished, it was still the talk of the town. Some people were terrified just looking at it, others couldn't wait to ride on it. But would it work the way it was supposed to? Would it rise into the sky, then glide gently down again? Would it be steady? Would it be safe? Finally, the wheel was ready for a test run. Spectators on the ground waited anxiously as construction workers jumped onto the bars of the wheel. Steam from the engines rushed through underground pipes and sent the giant wheel slowly rotating. The workers and engineers held on and yelled with excitement as they sailed in a giant circle towards the sky and back down again. Watchers below cheered. It would not be long before fairgoers could ride on the wheel. The fair managers were relieved. The wheel seemed safe so far. Without passengers, the wheel weighed more than 1,000 tons. Would it still be safe with the added weight of 36 passenger cars carrying more than 2,000 people? In late June, the wheel opened to the public. A throng of children and adults lined up to buy tickets. Each paid 50 cents for the ride. They stepped onto a loading platform and waited next to the rim of the giant wheel. The passengers' cars gleamed with fresh green paint, polished wooden doors, and glossy brass trim. Conductors dressed in blue and white uniforms with white gloves pulled open the doors to the cars. The crowds rushed forward. Each car had large glass windows so the passengers could view the landscape below. The engines throbbed as the wheel began to move. There was no turning back now. Up they glided. When each car stopped at the top, riders hung suspended above the ground. They were almost as high as the Statue of Liberty in New York City's harbor, and higher than Chicago's tallest skyscraper. For 20 minutes, the riders circled in the air, making stops to load more passengers or let them off. Here they could see the entire city of Chicago, its suburbs, the blue expanse of Lake Michigan, and parts of Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. The view was astounding. The ride had been the thrill of a lifetime. One thrill was enough for some folks. Others raced to the end of the ticket line for another ride. Thousands of visitors rode the wheel on that first day, and soon it was the most popular attraction at the Chicago's World's Fair. Rides were especially popular in the evening. As the sun set in the west, passengers could see its golden reflection on the waters of Lake Michigan. They saw the tiny network of Chicago's streets and rooftops stretched out beneath them. As the sky faded to a dark blue, 3,000 electric lights strung along the wheel turned on, making the night seem magical. George's wheel was an enormous success. On July 9th, the weather in Chicago was very hot. The sun beat down on thousands of visitors who raced through the gates of the fair. But at 3 o'clock that afternoon, the sun vanished from the sky. "Look at that," someone said nervously as storm clouds gathered in the sky. A violent wind began to blow. A gust lifted one of the boats from the lagoon and tossed it back into the water, upside down. The operators of the hot air balloon decided it was getting too dangerous to send the balloon up and stopped selling tickets. People on the ground anxiously eyed George's wheel. Surely the operators would close it down too, but the wheel kept loading passengers. More dark storm clouds appeared. Passengers already on board watched nervously as the tornado funnel formed and headed towards the fairgrounds. Passengers gasped as they saw tents on the ground pull up their stakes and flap wildly in the wind. Beneath them they saw burly men struggling to hang onto the cable that anchored the hot air balloon to the ground. They watched in terror as the tornadoes shredded the balloon's silk fabric. Riders on the wheel heard the sound of breaking glass. The wind had blown panels from one of the fair's main buildings and shattered them into thousands of pieces. People on the ground ran for cover. One woman on the wheel fainted. Others prayed for their lives as the wind howled around them. This was the storm everyone had dreaded. Gale wind force winds rose to 115 miles per hour. The wheel will collapse. People worried. The flimsy spokes could snap, or the passenger cars might blow right off the wheel. Now, as everyone watched the storm rage across the fairgrounds, they feared the worst. A newspaper reporter wrote when the storm began. George Ferris, along with his wife, hurried to the wheel and entered one of the cars. As the mad storm swept around the cars, the blast was deafening. The reporter wrote, "It screamed through the thin, spider-like girders and shook the windows with savage fury. But the inventor had faith in his wheel," he continued. "The beautiful wheel was hardly shivered. It turned," he wrote, "as evenly smoothly as if it were in mid a mild breeze." Many of the buildings and attractions at the fair were badly damaged from the storm, but the Ferris wheel stood unscathed, and the inventor George Ferris became even more well known than he already was. Hundreds of famous people visited the fair during the summer months of 1893. Harry Houdini performed his magic tricks near the wheel's location. It's likely that he took time off for his act for a ride. Theodore Roosevelt, who would become the President of the United States a few years later, stopped at the fair to have lunch with Daniel Burnham. There is no record of Roosevelt riding the Ferris wheel, but given his love of the exciting new experience, he would have been thrilled if he did. Chief Standing Bear, leader of the Ponca Native American tribe, rode the wheel while wearing a full headdress made of 200 colorful feathers. 14-year-old Helen Keller took a ride. She could neither see nor hear, but she could sense the excitement of the crowd and feel the big wheel carry her gently up and then down again. George's Ferris wheel brought thousands of visitors to the Chicago World's Fair. When the fair closed in October, more than 500,000 people have ridden it, and it continued to circle. First, the wheel was moved to a spot in Chicago's busy neighborhoods. Yet business was slow as it was soon sold to the city of St. Louis. As the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, the wheel once again thrilled thousands of visitors, but when the fair ended, there was unfortunately no home for the wheel. It was destroyed with dynamite and sold for scrap. George Ferris's design and vision still live on. Observation wheels everywhere are now called Ferris wheels in his honor. Engineers continue to build taller and taller structures based on his original design. Perhaps the seeds of the extraordinary wheel came to George as he lay in the grass as a boy, watching the water wheel turn as long as there were dreamers like George Ferris ready to make big plans. The world can look forward to his wondrous new inventions like his.